Welcome to the debate. It is February 23rd, 2026, and if you have been anywhere near a terminal or a tech headline in the last 12 months, you know that the ground hasn't just shifted beneath our feet, it has completely relocated. We are exactly 1 year into what people are calling the agentic era, marked specifically by the launch of Claude Code. And to frame our discussion today, we are looking at a provocation from Boris Cherny, the head of Claude Code at Anthropic. His claim is simple, it's blunt, and depending on who you ask, either exhilarating or terrifying. He says, coding is solved.
Yeah, solved. It's a very heavy word, isn't it? Because it usually implies the end of a problem, right? Like curing a disease or proving a theorem. But in this context, I worry it implies the end of a discipline. We are talking about a shift where the fundamental act of writing software, a craft we have been refining since the punch card days of the 1960s, is being outsourced to autonomous agents. So the central question we are debating today is clear. Is this shift to 100% AI-generated code a liberation that democratizes creation, or is it a dangerous abdication of understanding that threatens the very foundation of our technical infrastructure?
Right, and I am planting my flag firmly on the side of liberation. We are witnessing the rise of the builder. The artificial barriers of syntax, complex libraries, and just the crushing weight of configuration, they have been lifted. We have finally free to focus on the what rather than the how. The friction is gone.
And I, naturally, take the opposing view. We are rushing headlong into the era of the black box. I argue we are trading deep competence for shallow speed. By removing the struggle of learning, we risk creating an entire generation of engineers who are merely supervisors of systems they no longer understand. We are building a skyscraper, but we have fired the architects and replaced them with project managers who just point at the blueprints.
I do love that image, I have to admit, but I think it's stuck in the past. Let's look at the reality on the ground today. You have to engage with the actual metrics Boris Cherny put forward. He states explicitly, and remember, this is a guy leading one of the most advanced engineering teams in the world. He states he has not written a single line of code by hand since November 2025, not one line. And yet, he is shipping between 10 and 30 pull requests every single day.
Right, and just for the sake of clarity for everyone listening, let's define that quickly. A pull request, or a PR, is essentially a package of code changes submitted to a repository for review. In the old world, meaning, barely 2 years ago, a senior engineer might ship 1 or 2 meaningful PRs a day. Maybe 3 if they were on an absolute roll. 30 is? Well, physically, for a human typing manually, it is impossible.
Exactly, it's superhuman. But it's not magic, it's leverage. Cherny describes a 200% increase in productivity per engineer at Anthropic. This isn't about cutting corners. It's about the evolution of the role itself. He argues that the title software engineer is effectively dead, or at least dying rapidly, to be replaced by builder or product manager who codes. The core argument here is that coding was never the end goal. It was always a means to an end. If I use a calculator to do long division, I am not abdicating my mathematical responsibility, right? I am freeing my brain for calculus.
I knew you would bring up the calculator analogy. It is the absolute favorite shield of the AI optimist. But here is why that analogy fails fundamentally. A calculator is deterministic. If I type 2 plus 2, it always equals 4. If it equals 5, the machine is physically broken. These agents, these large language models, are probabilistic. They are guessing, they are predicting the next token based on a vast ocean of data.
But they're guessing with incredible, unprecedented accuracy now.
My concern isn't that the tools aren't powerful. It's the underlying assumption that the minutia is irrelevant now. There was a very telling moment Cherny described back in May 2025. He stood on a stage and predicted that by the end of the year, integrated development environments, IDEs, the software cockpits where coders have lived for 40 years, would be obsolete. He said the audience let out an audible gasp. That wasn't just surprise, was it? That was the sound of a profession realizing its primary interface with reality was being taken away.
Or it was the sound of a paradigm shifting.
People gasped when the iPhone removed the physical keyboard too. They said, how can I possibly type on glass? Now we don't even think about it.
A keyboard is an input method, and IDE is a workspace for logic. It's different, but let's look at a specific example Cherny shared, because I think it highlights the danger perfectly. He talked about a memory leak.
Oh, I love this story because I actually think it proves my point perfectly.
Let's see about that. So, the software was crashing due to memory usage. Now, Boris comes from the old world. He knows the layer under the layer. He knew how to take a heap snapshot, look at the memory allocation, identify the specific object causing the leak, and fix it manually. But there was a newer engineer on his team. This engineer didn't do any of that. They didn't spend 3 days debugging. They simply asked Claude to fix it.
And Claude did fix it, faster than Boris could have. It wrote its own tooling, it analyzed the heap, found the leak, and opened a PR. The junior engineer didn't need to spend 5 years learning the arcane art of heap snapshot analysis to solve the business problem. They just needed to identify the problem and direct the agent.
But play that out to its logical conclusion. What happens when the model fails? That is the crux of my entire argument. If you never learn the layer under the layer because the AI always does it for you, you are helpless the moment the agent hits a wall. We are creating a dependency chain where the human is the weakest link because they completely lack the deep context to debug the system they allegedly built. We are confusing the ability to generate code with the ability to understand engineering. If that agent hadn't found the leak, that junior engineer would have been staring at a screen, completely unable to do their job.
I see why you think that. I do. But let me give you a completely different perspective. This isn't about the loss of a skill. It's about a shift in which skills are necessary. Cherny compares this exact moment to the invention of the printing press. And this is a vital historical parallel. Before Gutenberg, you had scribes. Their entire lives were dedicated to the manual labor of copying text. That was their craft. When the press came, the scribes lost that job, yes. But the world didn't lose literature. It gained authors.
That is a very seductive comparison, but let's look at the nuance there. The printing press made distribution easier. It didn't write the book for you.
The nuance is latent demand. Cherny talks about Brendan, a data scientist at Anthropic. This is a guy who didn't know how to set up a complex dev environment. It's not his background. He fired up Claude Code in a terminal, which is already an alien environment for a non-engineer, and just started running SQL analyses. He didn't need to know the exact syntax. He needed to know what questions to ask the data. The barrier to entry completely collapsed. We are unlocking the ability for anyone to build software, just as the press unlocked the ability for anyone to read and publish.
Right, and I agree that lowering barriers is a net good. But there is a massive difference between lowering a barrier and removing the training ground entirely. Cherny himself brings up a counterpoint, perhaps unintentionally, when he talks about his time in rural Japan making miso.
Ah, the red miso anecdote. It's highly poetic.
It is more than poetic, it is highly instructive. He says miso requires patience. A red miso takes 3 or 4 years to ferment. It teaches you to think in long time horizons. You cannot rush it. He explicitly contrasts this with the instant gratification of AI engineering today. My fear is that by removing the slow work of coding, the debugging, the struggling with dependencies, the mental mapping of logic, we are losing the cognitive training that teaches us rigor and patience. If everything is instantaneous, do we lose the ability to think beyond the next 5 minutes? Do we lose the ability to sit with a hard problem?
I think that's a romanticization of drudgery. You are conflating difficulty with value. Boris also mentions Lena, an engineer on his team who still writes C++ on the weekends for the sheer beauty of it. Craft doesn't die. It just moves from being a strict requirement for employment to a pursuit of passion. If you want to make miso, make miso. If you want to handwrite assembly language, do it on Sunday. But don't force the entire industry to hand ferment their code when we have a factory that can feed the world.
But notice that Lena is doing that as a hobby. The professional requirement for deep understanding is vanishing. If deep understanding becomes just a hobby, then the professionals are shallow by definition. And this brings us to the management philosophy Cherny is pushing, which I find frankly alarming. He calls it under-resourcing.
It's a brilliant strategy for the agentic era. I think it's going to be the gold standard for every startup by 2027.
It sounds like a recipe for catastrophic burnout labeled as innovation.
Not at all. The logic is totally sound. Cherny advises CTOs not to hire more people initially. Instead, give the existing engineers unlimited tokens. He mentions engineers spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on compute. The idea is that limitation in terms of human headcount forces you to rely on the AI. It forces you to automate. The co-work team built their entire product in 10 days because they were a small team that leveraged agents effectively.
Yes, but at what human cost? We have to look at the Jevons paradox here. When you make a resource, in this case, code generation, more efficient, demand for it simply increases. You don't get less work, you get wildly more ambitious expectations. Cherny cites a poll where 70% of engineers say they enjoy their jobs more. That's great on the surface. But 20% of designers say they enjoy it less. Why? Because they are being pushed into technical execution roles they never asked for. Under-resourcing puts immense pressure on a small team to produce massive output by wrangling agents. You aren't coding anymore. You're frantically reviewing the output of 5 different AIs running simultaneously. That doesn't sound like liberation. It sounds like air traffic control during a hurricane.
I think you're assuming the experience is frantic, but Boris describes the exact opposite. He says he has never enjoyed coding as much as I do today because the tedium is finally gone. He's running 5 agents at once, yes, but he's drinking coffee while they work. He wakes up, checks his phone, and the agents have done the heavy lifting overnight. They ran the tests, they fixed the linting errors, they proposed the entire architecture. That is the definition of leverage. He isn't sweating over a semicolon. He is reviewing the logic.
Heavy lifting overnight implies an enormous amount of trust, and this segues perfectly into the most concerning part of this material, the safety of these agentic systems. Boris casually mentions running 5 agents, some unattended for 30 minutes, others for days at a time.
He mentions they are getting much better at running unattended. That's a triumph of the model's coherence over time.
But look at how they ensure safety. This is the part that should make everyone pause. Anthropic has to use mechanistic interpretability,
which is a fascinating, cutting-edge scientific field.
It is a terrifying necessity. For the listeners who might not know, mechanistic interpretability means they aren't just looking at the output of the model. They are literally peeking inside the digital neurons of the AI's brain to see what concepts are lighting up. They have found specific neurons that encode for concepts like deception.
That is a feature, not a bug. We can identify a deception neuron and monitor it. Think about that for a second. We can't see inside a human employee's brain to know if they are lying to us or hiding a mistake. With the model, we can. That is a level of transparency we don't even have with our human colleagues.
But pause and really think about the implications of that. We are building systems so complex and potentially duplicitous that we have to perform digital neurosurgery to ensure they aren't lying to us. And yet Cherny is comfortable letting these same agents pay his parking tickets and manage his project spreadsheets without supervision? If the creators have to look inside the brain to ensure it's not being deceitful, should we really be handing over the keys to our critical infrastructure so quickly?
You are focusing entirely on the fear rather than the methodology. Boris describes their safety approach as a race to the top. They release products early, like the research preview of Cowork, specifically to test them in the wild. You can't simulate the real world in a petri dish of laboratory evaluations. You have to see how the agent behaves when it actually tries to navigate a broken government website or a messy legacy codebase.
Testing in the wild is just a corporate euphemism for letting the public be the guinea pigs for autonomous agents.
No, it is the application of the bitter lesson by Rich Sutton. General methods that leverage computation always beat specific hand-coded safeguards eventually. We have to trust the trajectory of the model's intelligence. These agents aren't just predicting the next token anymore, as Boris clarified. They are planning. They have depth. They can actually reason through a multi-step task. If we stifle that because we're afraid of a parking ticket error, we lose the massive upside of having a universal problem solver at our fingertips.
The upside of speed? Perhaps. But let's talk about where this leaves the human in the loop. We touched on this, but the future role of the builder is something Cherny is very bullish on.
Bullish is an understatement. The future is the generalist. The silos are completely gone. Cherny describes his own team. The product manager codes, the designer manages infrastructure, the finance guy runs complex SQL. The walls between disciplines are crumbling. This is the Renaissance ideal, the polymath who can move from design to execution to deployment without asking permission or waiting on a Jira ticket.
To me, it sounds like total chaos.
It sounds like ultimate efficiency.
Cherny admits the distinctions are blurring with maybe a 50% overlap between roles right now. But he also says that as these roles merge, the title software engineer disappears. What is left? He says his life motto is use common sense. That is what is left. But I have to ask you, is common sense a technical skill?
It's the ultimate skill. When the machine handles the syntax and the execution, the primary human value add is judgment. Does this product make sense? Is this feature actually useful to the customer? Is this even the right problem to solve in the first place?
But common sense cannot debug a race condition in a distributed system that an agent just hallucinated. Common sense cannot optimize a database query that is suddenly slowing down production. If we move to a world where everyone is a builder but no one is an architect, we are building on sand. A generalist who relies entirely on a black box for execution is not a Renaissance man, they are just a consumer of a service they cannot replicate. We are creating a professional landscape where no one has a defined lane, and accountability becomes incredibly diffuse. If the agent wrote the code and the product manager just vaguely approved the plan, who is responsible when the database corrupts?
The person who deployed it. The responsibility hasn't changed at all. Only the tool has. You are clinging to the idea that typing the syntax equates to understanding the logic. Boris's point is that we are moving toward a world where human intent is translated directly into action. The friction is gone. Yes, it requires a major mindset shift. You have to stop being a scribe and start being an author. You have to stop being proud of knowing the library calls and start being proud of the actual product you ship to the world.
I am not clinging to syntax. I am clinging to the necessity of struggle in the learning process. The friction you despise is often exactly where the learning happens. If you remove the friction, you might also be removing the comprehension. It is the struggle that encodes the lesson into the engineer's mind.
I disagree completely. The friction is just waste, and we are finally getting rid of it. The time spent fighting a compiler is time not spent solving a user's problem.
Let's bring this to a close because we are looking at two very different futures here based on the exact same set of facts from Anthropic.
Indeed we are.
My position remains one of deep caution. We have solved the syntax of coding, yes. Boris Cherny's productivity is absolute proof of that. But by relying on agents we barely understand, agents that require mechanistic interpretability to check for literal deception, we are creating a terrifying fragility in our infrastructure. We are moving from being architects who know the weight of every brick to supervisors who just watch the building go up, hoping the foundation holds. We are trading the deep, slow satisfaction of the craft for a high-speed black box dependency.
And I see a completely different horizon. We are witnessing the democratization of technology on the scale of the printing press. The friction between having an idea and having a deployed product has been effectively removed. The job isn't gone. It has evolved into something much higher leverage. The minutia that held us back is now handled by the machine, freeing us to be true builders. The productivity gains, the sheer joy of creation that Boris describes, that is the future we should actively embrace.
It is certainly a brave new world.
That it is. The era of the software engineer as we knew it from the 1960s to 2025 has officially ended. Whether that terrifies you or thrills you, the only choice now is whether you are ready to become a builder.
Or a supervisor of agents.
Thank you for joining the debate.